ranking based on data. And one of the key programs of this government was the Aspirational District Program across 115 districts, where on 49 indicators we were ranking districts on real-time data, on performance of these most backward districts. They were not called backward by the Prime Minister, they were called the aspirational districts. But on 49 indicators across health, education, nutrition, we ranked them on the basis of data. We created competition, and that led to really good governance on ground. And this good governance based on data really transformed governance, because ranking of districts was available on each indicator minute by minute, hours by hours, and every district knew whether they were going up or coming down, and that competition really led to the transformation of these districts in a very big way. So I am a great believer that actually if India is to grow at rapid rates of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, there are only two ways, and that is one, using technology to leapfrog. Many of the things that we push through, the production-linked incentive looked at cutting-edge areas. Quite often in India, we get into the sunset areas of growth. We don't look at the sunrise areas of growth. So sunrise areas of growth we looked at the production-linked incentive scheme, which is, electronic manufacturing. And, many mobile manufacturers have really made a huge, huge impact, particularly Apple and Samsung. But it's very important. This question was asked, so I'm responding to that. It's very important in several of these sectors to build up component manufacturing in India. And component manufacturing is really the key, because that will give you greater value addition in due course, and the backward-forward linkage will take place. So when we did the PLI, we looked at electronic manufacturing, we looked at advanced chemistry, cell battery manufacturing, we looked at several areas where India could be a global champion. And I think the passion, the energy, the vibrancy on the technology sectors that you see is really the key to driving India's growth story of 9 to 10% over a 3-decade period. And without that, it will be very difficult for India to grow. So as I said, I moved on from being CEO Niti Aayog. I'm now the G20 Sherpa. And G20 is critical because India takes over the presidency this year. And G20 countries actually comprise of about 85% of the global GDP. They comprise of over about 78% of the global trade. They comprise of about 90% of the global patents. And they comprise of almost about 67% of the global population. And it's very, very important that we use this opportunity to really build the India narrative. You will never get an opportunity where it's G20, but there'll be the top 42 leaders of the world present in India. And you'll have about 190 meetings. Now, you hold a G20 meeting once in about 20 years. This is the first time India will be hosting it. So how do you differentiate India from the rest of the world? And how do you build an India narrative is really the key. And in Digital India Vision 7.0, it's very important to understand why this digital vision is very important. And I've been a great believer that while China took on this strategy of building roads, the BRI strategy, that is the Belt and Road Initiative of building infrastructure across the world, from Africa to Asia to East Asia. That has led to huge challenges in terms of rising costs of projects, payments not being made on time, many countries falling into a debt trap, etc. So can India present an alternative which is totally digital in character to the rest of the world? Can India present a cloud in a box to the rest of the world which can transform the world through health and education and nutrition? And can this be India's great strategy as a counter to China's BRI strategy? So I was thinking about this, and my view is that if you look in the past, Google, Amazon, Meta, Apple, Microsoft, they've all been at the forefront of what has been termed as the Cambrian explosion in innovation and value creation over the last 2 decades. And, actually they've been the key drivers, and they have billion-strong users, and they have if you look at them in total, they have a market value of around $7 trillion US. And they, along with the Chinese firms Alibaba and Tencent, actually dominate the global sphere in digital advertising, commerce, messaging, cloud infrastructure, social media, mobile operating system. All of them is a monopoly of these 5 companies plus Tencent and Alibaba. So what is the alternative that India can present? And, in contrast, India has actually adopted a very unprecedented and a very powerful new approach in public policy governance through the adoption of digital public infrastructure. And that has really enabled India to leapfrog in the traditional evolutionary processes, and actually it has allowed market players to innovate better and much better, and regulators to regulate better. And these public platforms, digital platforms, have all been open source. They have had open APIs, they've been open standard for interoperability, and they have leveraged public data for open innovation models. And they are all based on the core principles of, and this is going to become increasingly an issue that they are, and therefore India's, all these public digital infrastructure are all based on, principle of consent-based data sharing protocols. And they are all many of them have been developed in good private-public partnership, and many of them have been very inclusive, and they have reduced the digital divide across the country. So if you look around, they, these are huge sectoral public digital platforms built in India so far. If you look at the identity, it's Aadhaar. If you look at utility, it's DigiLocker and Bharat Bill Pay. If you look at payments, it's UPI, IMPS, AEPS. If you look at vaccination, we came up with CoWIN. If you look at toll collection, we came up with FASTag. In the field of education, it's National Digital Education Architecture. If you look at health, it's the National Digital Health Mission, which has been giving shape to. And if you look at taxation, it's the goods and services tax, which is totally digital, cashless, paperless. So what India has pioneered really is this unique approach. Each platform has actually solved for a need, but jointly has created a very powerful integrated stack over 1 billion people across all states of India and across 22 languages. And that has really been the strength of India. And it is this approach which will actually create a huge economic divide between countries, to my mind, between countries who will, actually be using some of the big tech companies, and some which will be leapfrogging ahead on the platform-based approach which India has built up. And all these platforms will actually help to create an alternative model on principles of openness, equity, inclusivity, fairness, transparency, and trust. And this, as data issues come to the forefront increasingly, this will be the challenge across the world. I mean, I just wanted to give you the example of unified payment interface, and I'm one of those who post-demonetization actually drove it in a very big way, and I've seen the challenges behind it. And I have not used my debit credit card in the last 2.5, 3 years. The only time I've used it is when I was in San Francisco and I had to hire an Uber about 3 months back. the Coven app has been totally paperless, cashless, and I've worked in the traditional fisheries sector of Kerala, where my job was to improve the livelihoods of traditional fishermen. And I was able to provide outboard motors, crafts, fishing nets. But the biggest challenge was to open their bank accounts. And Know Your Customer had to run around physical bank managers 8 to 9 months to open bank accounts for traditional fishermen. They were prone to drinking every day, whatever they could earn. So it was very important to open their bank account, put 50% of the money into their bank account every day. But to open their bank account has been the toughest job I have ever done in my life. It was a nightmare. And from 8 to 9 months of opening a bank account, today you can open a bank account in less than a minute using your biometrics. So I've seen this transformation from 9 months to, less than a minute. I've seen this transformation where, where people from digital cards, and I've been saying this for the last 3 years actually, that India will be the first country which will finish off digital, both debit card, credit cards and ATMs. And when I used to say this, people used to really laugh at me, but that is the reality. I mean, if you look at the payment across UPI, 6 billion monthly transactions, 6 billion monthly transactions valued over 10 lakh crores with close to about 260 million users and a merchant base of 50 million users. Already merchants in 10 countries accept UPI payments, and over 30 countries have expressed interest in adopting UPI. Now French government is entering into a UPI MOU with the national, with NPCI for UPI to be used in France. So that has been the power of UPI. So my belief is that the India stack with its APIs such as Aadhaar authentication, eKYC, eSign, this is a very, very powerful tool, and this will really drive the whole movement. And the platform approach taken by the government on conceptualizing UPI, and when it started, it was just a payment mechanism. But look at what has happened actually in reality. From the payment, what has happened? There are a whole range of new startups. I mean, if you look at it, out of 106, 107 odd startups, number of them actually started doing cashless, paperless lending. Look at Lending Card, look at Pine Lab. All of them were doing cashless, paperless lending. Unbelievable, unheard of. And then on top of that, you had a number of new startups which started doing personal wealth management. I mean, look at Zerodha, Upstock, all these new companies, new age companies, all of them unicorns. All of them were doing personal wealth management. And then you had a whole range of, my time taking an insurance when I was growing up. Buying an insurance policy was the biggest nightmare going through LIC agents. Look at Digit, look at Acco. 2 minutes you get a digitized, no paper, all paperless, cashless transaction, you get a digital policy, insurance policy. So, I mean, the technological leapfrogging of India digitally has been, according to me, the most remarkable story in the world. No country in the world has been able to achieve it. Totally interoperable, totally open source, and it's just unbelievable what we've achieved. And on top of it, we've allowed private sector all to compete and innovate. So on top of UPI, you have PhonePe competing with Google Pay. Unlike China, we've not created a monopoly out of our indigenous company. We've allowed PhonePe to compete with Google Pay and beat them at it. We've allowed Paytm to compete with WhatsApp. So that has been the remarkable story of private sector innovating on top of it. And this has actually facilitated a very democratic and neutral marketplace with very equitable opportunity of value creation for everyone. And let everybody come and compete in the marketplace. That has been the strategy. Now, it's also important to understand that Beacon protocols in the Indian, is the next big Indian intervention. And in this space, with a very revolutionary open source technology, a very sector agnostic framework, enabling interoperability. We are pushing for, this e-commerce openness and really open network for digital commerce, which ONDC, supported by the Government of India, is being validated by the public sector. And it's in its very first attempt in the world to democratize e-commerce through interoperability. And the network, which went live with a pilot in April 2022, is now providing access and equity to small and medium-sized merchants, and it's being implemented across 32 cities. And in addition to all the other players, now Microsoft has become a part of ONDC. So many big tech companies are realizing this is really the future. So my belief is that ONDC is especially pertinent, given that the coverage of retailers using digital commerce in India, which has remained at about just 15,000 out of 120 million retailers. It was just restricted to 15,000 out of 120 million retailers. The estimated size of online shoppers they've projected is to be about 220 million by 2025. And therefore, much like UPI, this will incentivize the private sector, and as ONDC spreads to more and more cities, from 32 cities to 100 cities, etc., you will see the benefit of it really going back to the small town producers, the small town unique, a whole movement of people getting onto e-commerce and moving away from physical sales to actually digital sales. My belief is that the world is actually seeking such innovation, especially in the handling of data. Data will become the crux. It will become the biggest challenge. And India has a proven track record to lead the way, to enable all countries to actually, what India has demonstrated to the rest of the world is that you can design and implement digital public infrastructure. And that is really the key. And by doing digital public infrastructure, you can do consent-based data handling, you can actually drive growth, you can actually transform health, education, vaccination, and you can drive payments, and you can actually really create a unique model. So I think, to my mind, this is really the big story about India's digital story. That India has done something very unique. India has done something which is very different from the rest of the world. What India has done is path-breaking, and this is something where India is way ahead of the rest of the world, particularly the developed world. And this is the big digital story of India, which CNBC needs to broadcast all over the world and make the developed world emulate India in its story. Thank you very much.
Presidency, which happens next year, and I'm sure you've already started work on putting the nuts and bolts together. How are we going to tell this story to the world? What is the narrative going to be, and what are you hopeful of in terms of objectives, in terms of milestones to be achieved at the end of that?
Yeah, so the way we'll do it is to get CNBC to do Digital 7.5 and broadcast the story all over the world. There'll be nobody better than Shireen to do this.
That we're already doing it. Thank you very much.
But important thing is to create some high-level principles around it, get in discussions with the developed world, because there are two different philosophies. One is on digital public infrastructure, which India has created, which we think is really way ahead of what the European world has done. It's way ahead of what America has done, where the big tech rules. But American government is driven by big tech. And therefore, it's very important to tell them how transformational is the story of India and how it can really transform the rest of the world. And many European countries realize that this is the way forward. This, I mean, if you talk to European countries, many of them realize that this is the way forward, and therefore a lot of convincing, a lot of interaction, a lot of discussions will have to be held with them to take this forward.
You know, one of the other challenges as we move more and more into a digitized world, Mr. Kant, is the fact that there should be a harmonization as far as standards are concerned. There should be a harmonization of rules and regulations. Otherwise, it's getting to be too complicated. And one would argue that perhaps the G20 could be the route to being able to achieve that. Should there be a global governance framework as far as data is concerned? Do you believe that that could be the role of the G20?
No, G20 has a very key and critical role in several areas. Building up a new financial architecture, building up a new digital architecture, looking at how climate adaptation and mitigation has to be financed, which many of the developed countries, despite commitment in COP21, have not lived up to. So those are very key issues which will be discussed, debated, and taken forward. But it's also important to understand that we are doing this, Indonesia right now is doing this in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. And there is a huge complexity because of external situations of both the war in Russia-Ukraine and the China-Taiwan crisis. So there is, you have to bring in to be able to do transformational things, to be able to build up a completely new narrative around climate, or to be able to build a new, to drive a completely new vision around digitization, or on accelerating the pace of sustainable development goals, much of which will be driven by digitization and data, you need a huge amount of political capital globally.
You know, you said that you haven't used your debit card or your credit card in many, many years. It's a good thing that MasterCard is no longer a card company, it's a payment company. Yeah. There are partners here this evening. They would have been very happy to hear you say that.
So, you know, I mean, since they are your sponsors, I realized that the best thing for MasterCards to grow and progress in India would be to partner NPCI.
I think that partnership in many ways and many forms is already happening. But let me.
No, why I'm saying this is if you have you already have about 260 to 270 million users on UPI. So if you want to grow in numbers, I mean the real value will come from volumes. So you completely, you know, India has created a completely different business model from what they are used to. Now, this is a path-breakingly different business model. Now, if you're going to continue with the American model for the rest of the world, it'll be very difficult for them to make headway here. And it's very important that they actually technologically leapfrog by doing something very, very different, which is about getting the big volumes together.
Well, Mr. Kant, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very, very much for joining us here at the Digital India Vision 7.0 Summit, and we look forward to partnering with you for the 7.5 edition of it. But always a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Always a pleasure to be a part of this. Thanks.